Cool. All right, so I broke it down by each game. So who do you got in Michigan versus Alabama to start out?
So for this game, it's kind of an interesting one. I mean, obviously with Alabama, some people, including myself, at the beginning of the year, called this a down year for Alabama,
Mm-hmm.
and rightfully so. I mean, they had a rough start to the season, but they've kind of picked it up lately. With Michigan, they've been pretty steady the entire season. You could kind of say their schedule was a cakewalk until the very end of it when they had to play like Penn State and Ohio State, and then had Iowa in the Big Ten game.
Yep.
Um, Also, the scandal that they had going on towards the tail end of the season, people would look at that and kind of say that, maybe they wouldn't have been so good if they weren't a part of that and they didn't have all this sign stealing. But I mean, you got to give credit to where credit's due, and so that I think you got to look into it. But for the winner of this, I got Alabama. I just think that they're the hotter team right now, coming off a win against Georgia, who has won 29 in a row before their loss in the SEC championship. Jalen Milroe is looking good. I think he finished, what was it, sixth place maybe, or seventh place in the Heisman voting.
Something like that. Yeah.
They've got Dallas Turner on the defense, along with Kool-Aid McKinstry to help out in the secondary. And so I think just with the momentum that they have, the talent that they have on their team, and how well they're playing, I think that would probably be my pick for that first game.
Mm-hmm. I got Alabama too, and you made a good point with that with like momentum. Anything, whether it be the college football playoff, March Madness, NBA playoffs, NFL playoffs, any of that, any sports for that matter. I mean, you can have a solid year, but then teams, teams with any sports can ride the highest momentum and just get hot at the right time, and this is like the right time, and Alabama's proven that. I know that I've mainly got a basketball background, and we're both Kentucky fans. The 2013-14 Kentucky Wildcats were an 8 seed, and they made the national championship game because they got hot and hit a bunch of game winners. And so, I could see that with this Alabama team because, yeah, like we both said, they lost to Texas early. I think it's like week 2 or 3. And, we can see now that Texas is a college football playoff team as well. So we thought, oh, Milroe is not very good, and they're on a down year. But they've gotten hot. They've beaten teams in a dominant fashion. Once they got it going, because I know that week 3 or 4, whenever they played South Florida, Saban benched Milroe and then tried out QB2 and 3, and it didn't really go well. But yeah, at the end of their season, they polished everything. So breaking it down with Michigan barely beat Ohio State, which Ohio State's a good team. They could have made the college football playoff. Part of the reason why Ohio State didn't make it is their quarterback situation is a little off. I don't think the McCord is that great. I watched the game against Michigan, and he just threw blatant bad throws. And with their strength of schedule, at the times of each game, they beat Ohio State, who was number 3. I want to say I didn't have that one on here, but they played at Penn State for a whiteout game, which the whiteout game is huge. They beat, and Penn State was number 10 at the time. Beat them by 9. And then they shut out Iowa, number 16 in the Big Ten championships. But like you mentioned, there are no other ranked wins on that schedule, which is interesting. And going into the game, your strength of schedule is going to show your true colors. Because with Alabama, like I said, their only loss is to college football playoff team, and that's in week 2. They've beaten number 15 Ole Miss at the time by 14. Number 17, Tennessee by 14. Number 14, LSU by 14. And then number 1, Georgia by 3. And, I mean I mean, you can talk about SEC getting their ranks, but like, I mean, the wins speak for themselves on that, and that's why I've got Alabama. What about Washington versus Texas?
I think this will probably be the better game of the two.
Mm-hmm.
I think you got two high-powered offenses.
Yes.
Obviously, with Michael Penix at Washington being second place finisher in the Heisman voting, some probably could have said that he should have been first. If it was earlier in the season. Credit to Jaden Daniels for winning that and having the season he did. But you got Michael Penix. You got an explosive running back at Washington. You got a top 20 projected pick at wide receiver at Washington. I can't remember his name. And then you've got, obviously, Texas, who they've been saying they've been back for who knows how long now, and they finally get that opportunity. You got Quinn Ewers at quarterback, and he'll be coming back next year, and that should make for another fun team down there. They got explosive weapons on the outside with transfer Adonai Mitchell from Georgia, and they also have another receiver out there who was hurt in the Big 12 title game, so we'll see if he's able to give it a go. But just, looking at strength of schedule, Washington at 11, Texas at 13. Texas had a big win at Bama earlier, like you said, in week 2. Washington ended up beating Oregon twice in the year. The Pac-12 was a lot better this year than they haven't been in years past. And Washington was able to have an undefeated year through that. But I think Texas, I think their defense is going to be just a little bit better than Washington at the end of the day. I think they're going to force a turnover or two more than Washington will, and I think that'll be the difference. So I think it'll be a shootout. I think Texas will end up winning it in the end, but I think it'll be a close game, and I think it'll be a fun one for sure.
Mm-hmm. I've got Washington in this game, but like you talked about, it's gonna be shootout. It's gonna be like a 50-40 type thing. 50 something to 40 something type thing. I mean, I'm really big on Michael Penix because he's just had a dominant year. I mean, if he had less interceptions, he would have probably finished as a Heisman candidate. I mean, Heisman winner. But I mean, we'll get into it later. But he threw 9 interceptions compared to the other Heisman contenders who had 4, 3, and then Marvin Harrison Jr. was a receiver. But going to strength of schedule and stuff like that, Washington at the time beat number 8 Oregon by 3, number 20 USC by 10, number 18 Utah by 7, number 11 Oregon State by 2, and then number 5 Oregon by 3. And like we mentioned, that's Pac-12 was a lot better this year, and I know that those teams that I mentioned didn't finish where they were at the ranking, but it's still talk about momentum. You guys still win. But going to Texas lost to number 12 Oklahoma by 4. That's still Oklahoma solid the whole year. They beat at the time number 3 Alabama by 10, number 24 Kansas by 26. That was a big second half when I watched that one. Number 23 Kansas State by 3 in overtime. And then number 18 Oklahoma State by 28. I do like Quinn Ewers, but of course he got hurt at one point during the year. Who knows if he's 100% still? He's still playing his heart out and looking good, but Washington's a different team from the teams that they've been playing, and so I don't know how that pressure is going to be, and I think that with Washington's high power offense, I think that Penix is going to have a dominant game. So you got Alabama versus Texas, and I've got Alabama versus Washington. Here you got in the championship for yours.
So I got a rematch of week 2. Obviously, we all saw what happened in that game with Texas winning that 34-24 in Alabama. But that was a long time ago. I think Alabama is just playing really well right now. Jalen Milroe is finding that confidence that most Alabama quarterbacks have had. over these last few years. I think he's got a dynamic to him in the run game that Alabama hasn't had at quarterback, even with Tua and Bryce Young. But I think it'll just be a little bit too much for Texas to overcome. I think it will be a good game, but I think Bama's going to end up winning that. I think they're just going to downright outscore them. I think it'll probably end up being like a 10-point game, but in this time in the favor of Alabama, with it in a neutral site game.
I have Washington getting Alabama, and my reasoning comes from the game before. So Alabama's playing Michigan, and Michigan has a good defense. I think that Alabama's going to get a little banged up, a little tired going into the game. They're going to be excited, no doubt. But I think that some guys are going to get banged up, whether that be linemen, whether that be Milrow, and potential injuries are going to be coming into that game. And so, with them being exhausted, I think that Washington's going to take advantage. And like I talked about before, and like you've talked about, I think that the high-powered offense of Washington, they're just going to outrun Alabama. And yes, they've got good cornerbacks, like Kool-Aid McKinstry, one of them. But Penix has a long ball, or he can run the ball. I think he's just a complete quarterback. So, that's why I have Washington there. So, I got a couple snubs here and there of two main college football playoff teams that didn't make it that people were reacting at. So, do you have a list of yours, or do you want to just talk about who you think got snubbed?
I think the two that you're probably talking about are either Florida State or Georgia.
Yeah, I
would I
got
be
both.
correct with that?
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess we can start off with Florida State. Obviously, tremendous season by them. It's hard to finish a season undefeated, and so I think they definitely have a case to be upset. But the thing is, everyone talks about, well, Florida State was undefeated. They beat all these teams. Well, yeah, they did, but that was earlier in the year when they had Jordan Travis. If you put this Florida State team up against LSU beginning of the year and you don't have Jordan Travis, I don't think you win that game.
No.
You put this team up against Duke without Jordan Travis, I don't think they win that game. You put this team up against the Florida team that played at the end of the year, and Florida had their starting quarterback, because they were playing a backup quarterback in that game, and they were winning for most of it. I don't think they win that game.
Yeah.
And obviously, Louisville, I think we all watched that game. It wasn't very entertaining.
Nope.
Until the very end when Florida State finally just put up some points because of some turnovers. And UK at the end of the year beat Louisville 38-31. Bama had beaten UK at the end of the year by 28 points.
Mm-hmm.
So at that, and automatically, it's just like, you just look at Bama and how they beat Kentucky when Kentucky beat ACC's best team, and Florida State only beat them by 10 in a very low-scoring, low-entertaining game. And then the other thing with all this talk that they have with the ACC is 5 of the chairmen in the College Football Playoff Committee are from ACC team schools. So, it's just like all these factors come into play. Florida State's a 14.5-point underdog to Georgia. So I can only imagine what they would have been if they were playing Michigan or Washington or Texas. Yes, you can call it a snub, but at the end of the day, you lost your quarterback. There's a rule in the committee's rule book that says if a team loses a player that affects their competition play-wise, as far as when it comes to the playoffs, that it can be looked into. I think all those factors come together to rightly rule out Florida State as the last team out.
Man, you did some research for that one. I didn't even notice that.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting how, Florida State's getting, an attorney to look into it, which is interesting. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, I saw that they were looking into filing a lawsuit against the College Football Playoff Committee, as well as ESPN, which I don't think anything's going to come out of that.
No.
It's just a bunch of propaganda to get, things just talking again and to get Florida State the news. I think if one thing is to come from all this, I think like we see with all this conference expansion, I wouldn't be shocked to see Florida State try and get out of the ACC. I think they see that obviously the ACC isn't looked at as powerfully as the Big Ten and the SEC are, and so they might be looking to get out of there soon. But this lawsuit and everything, I think it's just silly, and I think they're just trying to continue to have their name out in the news right now.
And that's a good point you bring up, because you've got Texas and Oklahoma coming to the SEC next year, and it looks like they're about to be a bunch of power conferences with Big Ten and SEC, and maybe a third one in there. I don't know, but yeah, Florida State. Like, here's my thing about Florida State, and I'll break it down. And some of the stuff that you've said. At the time, they beat number 5 LSU, number 16 Duke, number 14 Louisville, and the rest of the wins are against unranked teams. So that's a lot like, it kind of looks like Michigan's schedule. But you're on your third string quarterback, which, I didn't know about the rule, but I was going to say it gained less attraction in the College Football Playoff Committee, and so there's a rule under it that you talked about that says they can look into that. So it wasn't going to be as close of a game, which people want to see close games. You saw both games last year in the College Football Playoff. Pretty sure it was Michigan and TCU, and then Georgia and Ohio State. Both of them were down the wire. You had Ohio State try to kick a field goal to game it, and they couldn't. And you had Michigan and TCU was like a 1-touchdown game. They want to see close games because, people are going to stay and watch the whole time. Now, the national championship game probably wasn't watched the whole time as much because that was a beatdown. But that goes into factor with what I talked about earlier. Michigan playing TCU. TCU was a little banged up. And so then they went into that championship game a little banged up, and then Georgia, who did have better defense, took advantage of that, and they just destroyed them. So I think that would have happened in the first game for Florida State, because like you mentioned, and like we've mentioned with momentum, Louisville just lost to unranked Kentucky, who, I'm not saying that Kentucky's a bad team, and that's a little biased towards me, but Kentucky finished 7-5 and unranked, and they beat number 10 Louisville at the time. And so Louisville's not having good momentum, and they only lose to Florida State by like 10. I'm pretty sure it was like 16-6. Low scoring game. And if you can barely beat someone like that, then the College Football Playoff Committee is going to be like, okay, I don't know if this is going to work. So that's where I see that. Do you have anything on Georgia?
As far as Georgia goes, they took a tough loss to Alabama. I predicted Alabama to beat them in that SEC game.
Mm-hmm.
They won 29 games in a row. Back-to-back defending reigning national champions. Their schedule this year, just wasn't. If we're being honest, it just wasn't that good.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at the teams that were in, Alabama and Texas were the last two win. Texas beat Alabama early in the year. Alabama beat Georgia. There's just no way that you put Georgia in over those two teams, because you can't put Georgia in over Texas when Texas beat the team that you lost to.
Right.
And I get that it was the year, but Texas beat the team you lost to. Texas won their conference championship. You lost yours. The last team in Bama beat you in the conference championship game, and so you can basically say they had the momentum going into it rather than you did. Do I think their name was brought up in there as a case to be in? Sure. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's enough there for Georgia to warrant a spot in there, because you're not going to take Michigan out. You're not going to take Washington out. And then you just look at the last two teams in, and there's just no case for them to get in. over Texas or Alabama.
Yeah. So I broke it down, and this was at the time, of course. Georgia beat whenever Kentucky was number 20. They beat them by 38. That was whenever Kentucky was undefeated. Um, number 12 Missouri at the time, they beat them by 9. They beat number 12 Missouri at the time by 9. And then number 9 Ole Miss by 35. And then number 18 Tennessee by 28. Which all those teams finished basically a little lower on the ranking. But my thing is, Georgia won a lot of games in dominant fashion, and then they lose their last game of the year by 3. Their defense is phenomenal. I feel like it's such a difficult situation because, yeah, you won 29 games in a row, and then you lose your last one, and your last one determines if you go to the college football playoff or not. This is the year to basically say that the expansion needs to happen. And I wish that there could have been a way for them to make an emergency expansion, because there are way more than 4 teams that deserve to be in there. I mean, because we just talked about 6. You've even got Ohio State in there that could have gotten, they only lost to a college football playoff team as well, in Michigan. But, and then, there are a couple others that could have been in there. Oregon. Oregon only lost to one team all year. And they lost to them twice. And that's a college football playoff team. So, that's 8 right there, and I'm pretty sure it's going to 8. So it could have been a perfect year for the expansion. All right, let's go to. I know that Jaden Daniels got the Heisman, but what did you think about all the Heisman stuff?
I thought the Heisman went exactly the way it should have. Jaden Daniels deserved to finish first place. I think Michael Penix rightly deserved to finish second. I think Bo Nix deserved to finish third, and I think Marvin Harrison deserved to finish fourth. I think if you had asked me what my predictions were to be before the results came out, I think that's how exactly I would laid it out. When you look at Jaden Daniels' stats and you compare them to Joe Burrow's stats the year that he won, Jaden Daniels are outright better than Joe Burrow. Obviously, Jaden Daniels is more of a dual threat quarterback, whereas Joe Burrow is a pocket passer, and obviously Joe can move a little bit. But I just pulled up the stats just now. Daniels threw for 40 touchdowns. Burrow threw for 44. Daniels had 2,943 yards. That was his first season at Arizona State, compared to Joe Burrow, who was, on the bench his first 2 years at Ohio State before transferring to LSU. So Jano Daniels was obviously a little bit more experienced coming into LSU than Joe Burrow was. So it was probably easier for him to get the offense down quicker than Joe Burrow was, because he just didn't have the live action reps. But that's still, Jane Daniels' stats just stick out to you, where, he's one of the first ever quarterbacks to have a 4,000-yard passing season with 1,000 yards on the ground, having double-digit touchdowns in both passing and rushing. I think the one game that stuck out to me as his Heisman game was that game against Florida, when he threw for over 300 and ran for over 100. I think he had 4 touchdowns combined with the 2. I think that was just pretty impressive to watch that, and just how dominant he was. He led the SEC in touchdowns, both passing and rushing combined. And I think he was either 3rd or 4th in rushing yards in the SEC as well, not only leading the SEC in passing, but 3rd or 4th in rushing as well. I think the SEC is probably the most dominant league in college football, top to bottom, compared to the other ones. Even with the expansion, I think adding Texas and Oklahoma only furthers that case, as the SEC as being the toughest competition. And so I think he rightly deserved that. There's a case for Michael Penix to win it, but I think if you just look at how good the teams were that he faced compared to Michael Penix, how well he played compared to Michael Penix, if you took one out compared to the other, how good of a team they would have been, because LSU's defense was so bad this year that LSU they had to put up almost 40 points a game just to win a game. Whereas Michael Penix at Washington, they have a stout defense. They have a defense that can, force teams to put up less than 10 points, and the offense only needs to go out there and score a couple touchdowns. So I think there's obviously a drop off from Michael Penix compared to the backup quarterback. But if you were to put in the backup at Washington, I think he could have been sustainable enough to, maybe put up a couple of touchdowns and lean on their star running back as well. Whereas if you took Jaden Daniels out of the game, I think there's a bigger drop off between him and the backup there, and as well as their running back at LSU isn't as good as Washington, and so it would have been harder for them to put up points and to, at the end of the day, win more games than they did.
Mm-hmm. So I broke it down by stats. So Jaden Daniels had 40 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. He had a 95.7 QB rating, which is first. 3,812 passing yards, and his record was 9-3. Bo Nix had 40 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, a 91 QB rating, which is second. 4,145 passing yards, and record of 11-2. Michael Penix, 33 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 83.4 QB rating, which is 10th. 4,218 yards and 13-0 record. Then Marvin Harrison Jr. was 67 receptions for 1,211 yards, 14 touchdowns, and averaged 18.1 yards. So, what automatically eliminated guys to not get the Heisman is, Marvin Harrison Jr. could have gotten a little more. If he had one of these 3 quarterbacks, he would have gotten the Heisman. Just because he would have had more receptions, more yards, more touchdowns, stuff like that. What hurt Penix is his QB rating and interceptions. He did throw for the most yards and have a perfect record, but 9 interceptions and having 83.4 QB rating definitely hurts. I thought that I was going to go to Bo Nix, just because, one, Bo Nix just lost to Washington the whole year. In any game. And to look at his improvement, people needed to look at his improvement over his college career, because he wasn't in the best situation at Auburn and decided to leave, and then put up a dominant showing at Oregon this year. I'm pretty sure he was there last year, but to see his growth over his college career, I don't think it should have gone unnoticed. And that's why I thought that Bo Nix was going to get it. But another showing of growth is Jaden Daniels, which he got the Heisman because they showed his improvement over his college career as well. He, like I said, first in QB rating, close to 5,000 yards in rushing and passing, and 40 touchdowns and 4 interceptions is solid, along with first in QB rating. Now, his record isn't as good as the others, but you mentioned the defense of LSU was not very good. And so if he had a defense like the three other Heisman candidates, they would probably be in the college football playoff, just because of him being a great dual threat quarterback. Like I've mentioned before, I like Michael Penix a lot, because with any sport, really, I just like a fast-paced offense, and it's because it makes it more fun to watch. He has a slingshot arm that almost reminds me of Michael Vick at times, and maybe it's just because he's a lefty and has a slingshot arm. And Michael Vick is one of my favorite quarterbacks I've ever watched, and I see signs of him in there. but that's why I like Michael Penix so much. But yeah, to sum it all up for me, I thought it was going to be Bo Nix because he threw one less interception and had a better record. But Jaden Daniels does deserve it because he had an incredible year, and it, like you mentioned, if he was not in the game, they're not winning 9 games. So yeah. All right. Do you have anything else to recap or talk about with this?
I think really I'm curious as to how not only will these playoffs shake out, but also how does Florida State fare out against Georgia? I think if Florida State makes that a close game or somehow ends up winning that game, I think there's going to be even more of a conversation that comes out of it. But if Florida State ends up getting crushed, like I think they will, I think, people are just going to lay to bed their comments of what they said earlier in the year. I mean, not earlier in the year, but earlier this month when the rankings came out. So I'm interested in seeing how that goes. I'm interested to see how this approval of the 12-team playoff shakes out this coming season. How all this conference realignment is going to shake up things. Interested to see how this transfer portal comes to play once all these teams are finished playing. And I mean, really, just I think it's going to make for an exciting end to the college football season, and I think it's going to make for an exciting season to come.
Mm-hmm. My couple of things that I'll finish off with is one, like you've talked about, Florida State versus Georgia. I don't. It's interesting to hear that there are rumors of a possible boycott, which would be dumb because you're trying to prove that you should have been there, and boycotting won't prove anything with that. Um, on the Texas side of things, you mentioned it earlier how Ewers is returning. That opens up the possibility of Arch Manning transferring, and I would not be opposed if he went to Ohio State. I think that would be huge. I mean, and it's not out of the realm of possibilities. I mean, just because he wants snaps, and he was QB3 this year, and so he'll get experience there. And also, there are rumors if Marvin Harrison Jr. stays another year, and that's mainly with NIL stuff, which there are rumors floating around 15 million, which would be crazy. But if you've got an Arch Manning and Marvin Harrison Jr. connection, I don't see them losing a game, which they only lost one this year with Kyle McCord. And Kyle McCord was not solid. But here's a dark horse for next season, even that you mentioned. I mean, that we mentioned just like next season. I'm seeing a lot of. Because I was big on Colorado coming into the year. Colorado just got the number one offensive tackle in the nation, and also gotten a bunch of other um, other offensive linemen. If they polish up a team that, can protect Shador, yeah, and have Travis Hunter the whole year, they could be scary, in my opinion. Which I don't know if that's just me being a fan of Prime and being a fan of what they're doing over there, which they've won. I mean, even though they didn't finish that great, they still won more games than the previous year. But I think that if they're doing good, that's good for college football because they'll gain more traction. All right. I mean, do you have anything to say about that or anything that I said?
Definitely interested in seeing how Colorado does. They're moving to the Big 12 this coming season.
Yeah.
So that'll definitely be interesting to see how they fare in that. Like you said, they revamped their offensive line in the portal already. They got 5 new guys coming in, not only through the portal but through the recruiting cycle. So that'll definitely give Shador some more time in the pocket. Um, so that will be interesting. You brought up a good point with Arch Manning, with Quinn Ewers returning, Malik behind him as the second string, and then obviously him being third string. I guess it just depends on how long he's willing to wait for his turn.
Mm-hmm.
And if Ohio State is an option, that would definitely be interesting. Uh, but, I mean, I guess we'll find out all those answers soon. And like I said, I think it's going to make for a really exciting college football season to come, not only with all of that, but also the release of the college football video game coming out this summer. So,
Yep.
that's all that's coming out, and I think that's going to be one heck of a way to start the year.
My goodness, I about forgot about that.
Yeah.
All right, I thought we had a good show today, and appreciate you coming on and talking college football, which I'm not as educated on football as I am with basketball, of course, but I still like watching it, and I still like talking about it with people. And I thought this was good.
Oh yeah, it was definitely a good time talking about it. I think there were some interesting things to cover, and I think we did a good job of that. And definitely interested in seeing how the playoff shakes out this year.
Oh yeah, see how many we get right in there.
Oh, I know it. I think one of us will be right. So
Fingers crossed.
I'll be interested to see if Michigan ends up spoiling our picks or if Bama can hold true.
Right. All right, I'll let you go. Appreciate you coming on.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. I always enjoy doing these.
Yes, sir. All right, we'll see you.